to everybody. On Monday, when I arrived, I had a conversation with Ati about exactly what I should do in this session and how I should interpret the title. And he suggested that I should tell a brief story about the implementation of colorectal cancer screening in England. So that's what I've done, and he suggested that I should bear in mind the contribution that I made and others made in the book that you've all been given at the beginning of this meeting. I went on the web and had a look at what storytellers should look like, and the message here is that perhaps next time you see me, my beard will be even longer. So, the screening program in England was very much based on the evidence that was accrued during the 1990s that demonstrated unequivocally that a very relatively simple test, a guaiac-based fecal occult blood test, could substantially reduce mortality. And so therefore, at the end of the 1990s, England and other countries in the UK set about preparing for that process. They looked for the best GFOBT, they gathered a team of enthusiasts, they wrote very carefully software that was going to allow a programmatic process of distributing the test and monitoring processes. It determined standards and quality assurance issues. And overall, over a series of rounds, as pilots, it checked that the process worked. So when it came to implementation, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, they set about it slightly differently, independently to England, and England commenced in July 2006. Again, using a guaiac test, using it biennially. And because resource was a problem then and remains a problem now, the implementation was done gradually. It was phased, 3 phases, phase 1, 60 to 69, then 70 to 74, and at that stage, the third phase, that was the younger age group, we were unsure quite how to do it, and we were awaiting publication from Wendy Atkin, and more about that later on. But it was very much an organized approach, and it was very much arranged around meeting the needs of the whole population. So how is that organized? Well, across England, we have 5 hubs, and those hubs deal with a substantial population, each deal with a substantial population, and they maintain an organized arrangement. They are responsible for the call and recall, the laboratory testing, a helpline service. They make the appointments for colonoscopy in the light of a positive test, and they do local statistical analysis. But they're all following the same formula. They're all doing exactly the same thing, and they have to meet the same standards. To do that in an effective way, of course, you need a large computer. You need a computer that gathers all the data together so that you can do substantial analysis of the data subsequently. So the process, we commence with the pre-invitation. There's now very good evidence that shows that a pre-invitation will increase uptake. We then send out a test by default, unless an individual has asked us not to progress it. We send it out, and the return comes back free of charge. The English population is probably no different to elsewhere, and they need to be reminded after 30 days to do something. And then in the light of that, if there's no reply, then they get invited again in 2 years' time. If it's negative, again 2 years' time. But if it's positive, then we make an appointment in the hubs for an appointment with a screening nurse for them to discuss the process of endoscopy and to assess the appropriateness of endoscopy. The general practitioner, you should note, is not involved with this process until right at the end when they are informed what the outcome is. And that was done for reasons of efficiency, and it's based on experience that we'd gained dealing with the breast cancer screening program and the cervical cancer screening program. Now, I have to point at the outset that we are using guaiac. We're using guaiac because at that point in time, that's where the evidence was. And we're probably the only country in the world that has this rather complex algorithm that can involve individuals doing a total of 3 kits. That clearly has a downside, and it does mean that along that journey, those individuals who are not positive on the first kit, a proportion will drop out. But nevertheless, in terms of the total uptake, certainly in the hub that I'm dealing with in the south of England, the uptake is approaching 61%. So that's the hub, and the hub then deals with in my case, 17 screening centres, accredited screening centres using accredited endoscopists. Those sites have accredited sites where endoscopy can be performed and a larger number of sites where the nurse clinic appointment can take place. Accreditation and quality assurance and performance monitoring is integral to the whole process. At every step, that process is being monitored, and that's therefore the need for a comprehensive computer system. So we have here an organizational structure that currently uses FIT, but is suitable for the rollout of alternative screening modalities. And the headlines? Well, we're dealing with a substantial population. We have sent out a very large number of kits and taken a very large number of helpline calls from members of the public who are unsure what to do. In total, the story so far, 20 million kits have been sent out, getting on now for 250,000 positive screens leading into colonoscopy, and we've identified in excess of 17,000 cancers and getting on now for 20,000 advanced adenomas. So you could argue here that we're both detecting cancer and we're also, to an extent, preventing cancer. And because we have this comprehensive system of monitoring, we know exactly what is going on in the screening centres, we know who is performing the colonoscopy, how many they're performing, and what the outcomes are. So in episode 1 of that screening process, you can see from that diagram that 9% of those who had colonoscopy had cancer and 10% had advanced adenomas. And we're able to monitor that process, so that's in the 2nd episode of screening and in the 3rd episode of screening. So I think you can conclude a number of things from that data. First of all, it's pretty obvious that the polypectomy rate is high. Around about 50% of the individuals who are called for colonoscopy have polypectomy, and that the proportion of cancers that we're detecting is diminishing with time. That's, I think, an indication of the success of the program. We're reducing the burden of disease, and we're seeing that relatively the proportion of those who have low-risk adenomas is growing because they're creeping in and becoming the majority. Again, this organized approach means that we can monitor exactly what's going on in different parts of the country, in healthcare areas, in general practice, and right down to postcode sectors. So we can look at it and we can see what the uptake is, what the positivity rate is, and what the clinical outcomes are in individual areas. So it allows us to identify those areas of deprivation where uptake is poor and therefore they require further attention. And that's an example in Portsmouth. One generally finds that the uptake is poor in the leafy suburbs and considerably less in the inner areas of large cities. And it allows us to do more comprehensive studies, looking at the uptake and relating it to indices of deprivation. I think it was Michelle talked about rich and the poor. I talk about the posh and the poor. So the posh uptake is good, the poor, it is considerably lower. And that's something that, of course, we're all aware of. The program has been designed to reach the total population, and that therefore means that we need to go to some trouble to ensure that we've got the right sort of literature, that we can respond to queries and questions that come through the helpline. We have a range of languages, we have sign languages, we have Braille, we have leaflets that are purely diagrammatic rather than using words. But we still struggle to reach the prison population. That's something that is being cracked. We do have problems with the military population who are not within the screening program. And from a day-to-day basis, we struggle with people who've got dementia, learning difficulties, and blindness or partial blindness. So those challenges remain. In terms of the uptake, since 2006, the average has gradually climbed up. There was a real question as to what it would be when people are invited for the second time. And we now know that around about 20 to 25% of the people who did it first time, well, sorry, I'll rephrase that. The people who didn't do it first time do it on their second or subsequent occasion. And those individuals who did it on the first occasion, they do it again. 90% of people who did it first of all will do it again. So there's a barrier to doing it, but once you've done it, you realize it's not quite as difficult as you might seem. We know that if you look at the relationship between the index of multiple deprivation and uptake in these various groups, people have been invited for the first time, there's that gradation that you've seen already, and that continues as you progress to people who do it for the first time in their second round or in the third round. But cumulatively, when you associate all of that data, while that gradation still remains, we're reaching 71% of the population by 3 rounds. Now that's using GUAC, and GUAC has significant problems. It can't be automated, you can't adjust the positivity rate. We're expecting people to do at least 3 samples and sometimes 9 if they have to do 3 kits. And the reading process, because it's not automated, is dependent upon the ability of the individual to identify a small change in the blue color. It's an operator variable. And therefore, we need to change. And we have the advice of what to change to. The European guidelines make it very clear. I suppose it make it very clear because I happen to write them, but whatever, they make it very clear that fit is the way to go. And I could spend another 10 minutes explaining why fit is the way to go, but that is the direction that we intend to travel. And that was agreed way back in 2010. We were about to set up on a pilot when Wendy Atkin published her paper about fit. And I have to say that derailed us somewhat. The Prime Minister, who'd just been elected, decided within 6 months that we were going to adopt flexi-sig screening, and we have now commenced that process. We have 6 centres that are already doing it, and we have a trajectory of completing flexi-sig screening by the end of 2016. But going back to fit, we are now at a stage where pilots are being prepared, we've identified products that will work, and the software has been written. So we are on track, although we're a bit delayed. I thought it was appropriate that I should at least mention FlexiSig, because there may be curiosity about that in the audience. This program requires people to be pre-invited, much like the GUAC-based testing, pre-invitation. They have a period of 2 weeks to say no. Otherwise, we send them an invitation with a date and appointment for colonoscopy. But they have to respond and accept that invitation. If they don't accept it, then that lapses, and they will be eligible for GUAC-based testing in 5 years' time. This is a process that takes place at the age of 55. And for the people who respond, we then adjust the clinic appointments, and people have bowel cancer screening using FlexiSig at week 0. So that's the process. It would take some time to explain the details. And remarkably to me, the uptake is approaching 50%. It's still very early days, but much greater than I would have anticipated. Back onto FIT, the evaluation of technologies are now taking place. For the pilot, we shall be using the OC sensor, and the OC sensor will be used in this pilot in place of GUAC for a significant number of tests so that we can compare and contrast without damaging the system, because the positivity rate will be high in that process. It's important that the technology, the material that we circulate is easily accessible to the public, and so we've spent some time developing a package that allows easy access. So it's a single box that contains the sample. You remove the address label when you remove the cellophane wrapping, open the box, take out the kit. The kit has a barcode on it which has already been linked to the individual. The kit is removed, fecal material is added. I can assure you that is not fecal material, that's all bran. And then returned to the bottle, the date of the sample is added, the name of the individual, package is closed, and then put back into the post. So there's no additional literature that has already gone in the pre-invitation. Now, my view is that this is just the beginning. This will give us a single risk factor with a simple cutoff. That's how it's being used up to now. But there is absolutely no reason why we shouldn't combine it with other risk factors to provide a more powerful predictor of colorectal cancer. We know what the FIT concentration is. It's a concentration. It's not just a yes or no value. The higher the concentration, the greater the risk. We know that age and sex relates to the risk of colorectal cancer. We have in the computer system the screening history. All of those are indices of risk, as is the indices of multiple deprivation that we'll get from the address of the individual. If they have been seen by the screening nurse, we may also have additional information like medical history and family history. All of that can be combined into a single risk factor, and that single risk factor will therefore prove more powerful in providing an indication of the risk of colorectal cancer. And so in summary, the program in England has, I think, been largely successful. It's had its problems, but strong leadership, centralized organization, a program that's been designed to meet the needs of the deprived population and making sure that quality is center of the process has proved beneficial. The information system is essential. Without the information system, you can't monitor, you can't evaluate, you can't use knowledge from that to bring in innovations. And it also allows you to share experience with others, and I'm privileged to be able to make a contribution to the European School of Screening Management. And of course, you can also share it with the delightful colleagues who you meet at meetings like this. Thank you all very much.